Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about good lessons from a bad teacher. This is something that I talked about really briefly almost a year ago in a video called School versus Self-Taught, where I was talking about the pros and cons of learning at a university versus self-teaching, teaching yourself. And also I apologize, the dog is snoring up a storm. In that video, I talked about an experience I had with a really bad teacher my first year of engineering school, my undergraduate degree. I have a link below, not only to the video, but to the time marker where I start talking about that. Because I want to talk about it in more detail so you can really understand how bad it was. And then I want to tell you the lessons I walked away from that with. And sort of how I think this can help you approach things that happen to you that aren't the best thing in the world, but you can take away something good from it. So let's dive into this a little in more detail. I actually wrote notes because this was, first of all, I have a lot of notes for this, and I even talk about my notes, and maybe this is the origin of my note taking. But I didn't want to skip anything because it kind of, there's not only a couple sidebars I have to do, but there's an epilogue. So I started in engineering school in the fall of 1983. I was in a scholar program. This was at University of Virginia Engineering School. It was called the Rodman Scholars. Now, this scholarship program had no money attached to it. Zippo. I didn't get a thing for doing it. It was supposed to be like this prestigious thing, and I got put in some, prestigious classes. Turns out those classes were really just the same classes that other non-scholars got. The only difference was everyone in that class was a Rodman scholar, which this is important later because some of these classes taught on a curve, which meant instead of me being in a class with just random engineering students, I was in a class with all of the students who were picked to be the best of the incoming high school students coming into the University of Virginia Engineering School that year. So that's important later. Now let me quickly talk about, there were these AP tests you took in high school after SATs. If you were in some AP classes, you could then take these AP tests. And I took a few. And at UVA, depending on how well you did, you could either skip a class or skip a whole year. For example, I got a 5 in my AP biology class because one of the best teachers I ever had in my entire scholastic career, Mrs. Seftis at Grofton High School, was an excellent biology teacher. She taught us so well that the biology test was a mixture of multiple choice and essay, and I felt completely prepared. There was nothing they asked that I didn't go, yep, Mrs. Seftis covered that in detail, and I understood it because I asked a lot of questions, and she answered them all great. Got a 5 in that. No first-year science at engineering school for me. But I didn't get a 5 in math. I got a 4 in AP Calculus, I think it was called. So I got to skip the first semester's class and go directly into what would have been the second semester class, but I got it taught my first semester. So which means, this is important too, I was in a class that's normally taught the second semester, but it was being taught the first semester by everybody who'd gotten a 4, who got to skip the first one. This math teacher was rough. That's the nicest thing I can say. The worst thing I can say, she was the worst teacher I ever had in my entire scholastic career. And I say that definitively and with no regret. She was terrible in her teaching method. She was terrible in her grading method. She was terrible in her overall attitude. And I remember, I don't even care to think about her a lot. So I'm going to go into detail here. And this is one of those things that I went through my notes. I was like, oh yeah, I remember how bad she was. And then I can just let go of this. So let me explain what her classes were like. This was a calculus class. I remember you learned things like centroid and double integration and all this stuff. She taught as quickly as possible. She would come in, she'd plop down her stuff, her transparencies on an overhead projector, and she'd just start talking. If people were making noise, she didn't care. If that meant you were sitting in the back and you couldn't hear, she didn't care. She just started talking. By the way, if you asked questions, too many. You could ask a couple questions in a class. If you asked more than that, not just one person. If anyone in the class asked more than 1 or 2 questions total, she would get angry at us for asking questions, and you're interrupting my lesson plan. Stop asking questions. And she'd just keep going. She would frequently give us pop quizzes. No, there were quizzes you didn't know were coming. And so the only tests that were scheduled was a midterm and a final. But she would randomly do pop quizzes throughout. This was a 15-week semester. You might come in, I think it was 2 days a week, maybe 3 days. So you never knew what was going to happen. You'd come in, boom. She'd come in, put up a transparency, and then go, booyah, pop quiz. Let me describe one of the pop quizzes I took. You had to do something to come up with what was called a Taylor series expansion. Taylor series is a bunch of terms like, 1/2 plus 1/3 plus 1/4. And then you just say plus ... to show that went on forever. The Taylor series expansion just continued like that 1/n forever. I got my test back and I had a 7 out of 10. There was a -3. But my Taylor series was perfect. So I went to her office hours and I said, I don't understand why I lost 3 points. She pointed to the end of my Taylor series where I'd written plus ... And she said, there should be 3 dots there. You don't have 3 dots, -3. And I went, well, I have 2 dots. Shouldn't it just be -1? And she goes, you should have 3 dots, -3. And I said, it's only a 10-point test. You took me, and I got the right answer. You took me from a perfect to a 70, which is a C-. She said, you did not have the correct answer. Your answer was incorrect. Your answer was not a Taylor series. You get a C-. I won't discuss it. And I'm like, whoa. Okay. Later, the midterm exam did not go well. Lots of people scored really badly, including me. She then announced that she was going to grade our notes. And at the end of class that day, she said, hand me your notebook. You will get it back at the next class. She took our notebooks home and returned them at the next class, and we were graded on those notes. Were we graded on the content? No. She also graded on penmanship. So I think I got a D or an F because I have bad handwriting. Was my content good? Yep. I wrote down everything she said. I had diagrams labeled, but my penmanship was bad. So fast forward near the end of the semester, I'm going in to this final with a D. I'm going to get a D in math. I've never gotten anything but an A in math. I called home, told my mom, oh my God, I'm failing a school class. I shouldn't be at university. I'm horrible. I need to get out of here. And my mom talked me down and said, hey, there's adjustments you're going to have to make. This isn't high school anymore. Something else that's important right here is at this point, after that getting that D on the midterm and going into the final with D, for probably the last half of that semester, I was only studying this one math class. My other classes, I would do the homework as quickly as possible, and then I'd jump back into math. I wasn't studying. I wasn't doing any of the reading assignments. I was all math. So sidebar 1, I got pulled in before the final exam on physics by the physics teacher, who, by the way, was not only the dean of the department, but was one of the professors who handled the Rodman Scholar Program. So that physics class was populated by entirely Rodman scholars. And he said, I'm just curious, Mr. Kane. I remember admitting you to the Rodman Scholar Program. I remember your transcript, and you had all A's in physics and all your science classes and all your math classes. Why are you getting a C- in my physics class? I explained the situation to him that I was having in that math class, and I also told him that I had stopped studying physics 8 weeks before. And he said, what do you mean by that? And I said, I come to your class, I pay attention, I take notes, but I have no time to look at anything, and all the tests you take, I just try to remember what you said. And I said, if you look at my latest test that I only did okay on, there was a formula I couldn't remember, so I derived it from first principles like you did in the lecture. And he actually pulled my test out and looked at it, and he goes, oh my God, here it is in the sidebar. You re-derived that. And I said, yeah. And he said, oh, but you made a mistake in the derivation, so you got the wrong answer. And I'm like, yep. So he asked what math class this was, and I told him the class and the name of the teacher, and he just nodded knowingly. And I said, oh, you know her? And he was, yes. Second sidebar, the next year I was in a Rodman only project class, which was real interesting to teach how to work in teams. The teacher asked what we thought of the class, and we were talking about the pros and cons of working in teams, and how it was sometimes really difficult when somebody on the team didn't do as much by the other team members. He then asked, would we want a class like that again? And we were all like, yeah, we think we would. And then he said, would you do a Rodman? If you were being asked to join the Rodman Scholar Program again, would you do it? Everybody in the class raised their hand except me. So he turned to me and said, Mr. Kane, I'm curious why you didn't raise your hand. He goes, I'm not mad. I'm just curious what it is. And I told him about the other scholar classes I had. And I said, they're all exactly the same as the non-scholar classes, except I'm in with the other scholars. And since a lot of them were graded on curves, it looks like I'm doing worse, even though I'm doing the same as I always did. And I probably would have gotten an A in those classes, but I'm getting B's and C's in this one. So I said, so here's the Rodman Scholar. It has no financial aid. The classes are harder and I'm doing more work, and my evaluations are worse. Why? Let's turn the question around. Why would you think I should do this? What special thing do you think I'm getting out of this other than kind of feeling bad about myself a lot? And he was like, that's an interesting take on it. So let's fast forward to how the class ended, which isn't even the epilogue. So final exam day came in that math class. Keep in mind, almost half the class was going into this with D's or F's. So the professor said, look, if your grade on the final exam is better than the grade you have going into it, you're just going to get that. I found out later, I don't think she didn't want to do this. She was kind of told by the dean, we can't believe you can't fail half this class. I got an A on the exam. I studied for it. I started studying 2 weeks before that final exam. I memorized pages of formulas. I memorized pages out of the book. I got an A. When I went to go pick it up from the TA, because you go get your grade and you could pick it up, the TA said, oh, she wants to see you. So I went to see her. She was not happy. She said, Mr. Kane, I don't think you deserve this. I'm not happy with your performance or your attitude. I just wanted you to know. And I said, well, that's great. I'd like you to know that you're the worst teacher I ever had. Your technique is terrible. Your attitude is terrible. You've made me go from feeling a joy about math to hating math. And that's all on you. And she said, well, do you think I care about that? And I said, I don't care. I'm not going to think about you anymore. If I see you in the hallway, I'm just going to look the other way. And I'm going to be here the next 4 years. So you're going to see me walk right by you in the hallways. I'm just going to look the other way because I don't care to interact with you or see you ever again. And she got really angry. And I said, now, are you going to break your promise? I got an A on your final. I expect to see an A on my transcript. And she got all tight-lipped. This is the epilogue. 4 years later, I was the editor of the engineering school paper, and I did an editorial about something I heard that the UVA's e-school let in about twice as many students as they planned to graduate. And the way they got rid of them was the first 2 years they threw really difficult classes at them and encouraged people who weren't doing well to consider transferring into the College of Arts and Sciences. And I know people who did that. I know someone who went from computer science to getting a math degree, which was in the Arts and Sciences school. And I read an editorial about that, and I mentioned that math teacher my first year and how she had to have been part of that program, how I really did not like her, and she made me lose my joy of math. He asked me not to publish it, this dean of the engineering school. And I said, you're not even, unless you order me not to do it. And he goes, I'm not going to do that. But he goes, I don't think this is a good thing to do. It makes my life harder. By the way, I heard that later from people above me, how I was making their life harder, when actually what it was is I was pointing out things that I don't think they were doing well, and they didn't want to hear it. And they would say, well, you're just making my life harder. Well, you know what? You make my life harder every day. So, by the way, the editorial got published. Tons of people agreed, pointing out other teachers that they thought were doing the same thing. And let's just say that something came out where this teacher turned out to not be a tenured professor, but she was salaried or something. She was in a position that couldn't be removed. And apparently that's what they apparently did use her class for this. So, I hope I don't come across as sounding as bitter, because this was something that I learned a lot of things from this. Sometimes, like I've said, you can learn from failure. Let me tell you some of the lessons I learned from this. First of all, don't let one bad experience stop you. I didn't quit the university. I didn't quit my degree. Other people did. I didn't do that. I basically was like, look, I had 6 classes that semester, and this was the only one that was like that. I'm not going to assume everything is going to be this bad going forward, and nothing was. That was the worst class I ever had in engineering school, and it just happened to happen at the very first semester. Also, but don't let one bad experience change you. I tried not to sour my whole university experience. I tried to approach it as, okay, here's something that I really should learn from. Now, years later, when the Alumni Association was asking me for money, I'm like, I can't in good conscience give you money because you hired multiple teachers like this, and I don't agree with that. So, no money for you. However, it did make me realize that if you let a bad experience change you, that will change your experiences from then on. If you approach the world with a bitter mindset, a lot of times you'll get bitter back at you. And then that reinforces, you're like, see how bad the world is? See how bad it's treating me? If you start treating people badly, you start getting treated badly in return. And a lot of you probably don't think you're doing it, but if you approach people and you're pessimistic or untrusting or just bitter, you're going to get that back. And then you're going to think it justifies your behavior, where in fact, it's your behavior that's causing it. Here's another lesson I learned. A little bit of extra work from me, I could have avoided this entire experience. If I had only gotten a 5 on my AP calculus test, I would never have encountered that teacher. I would never have taken that class. I would have skipped the entire first year, and I never would have known. I probably would have had a much happier engineering school experience. For a little more work early on would have saved me a lot of heartache later. This is a really important lesson. I also, this was probably the first lesson I had that people in authority will sometimes act badly. Not just the teacher, but that dean. It's because they've got a lot of pressure on them coming in on from other things. But they can act badly. So sometimes they just do. This isn't an excuse, it's just an explanation. Sometimes people are under tremendous pressures you don't know about. They act badly. It's not an excuse. It's an explanation for why they act that way. And then the last thing I want to say is I wonder sometimes if this is the origin of my note-taking. When I got graded badly on my notes, I did try to take better notes, and I took better notes from then on. So sometimes I wonder, is that math class the origin of my note-taking? My better note-taking? My detailed note-taking? Maybe. I don't know. But anyway, at least I can look back on that experience and go, I learned a lot of good things from it. So there's that.